Generally, when people look back on Mafia, the first thing they'll bring up is either the infamous racing level or the story. They'll say something like, Mafia is worth playing for the story alone, or Mafia's story is what makes it good. I'm the same way. If you brought up this game in conversation, I'd probably just say, yeah, if you like good stories in games, then you should definitely play Mafia. But I don't believe that Mafia's narrative itself is what really makes it great. Don't get me wrong, I still think it's one of the better stories in video gaming as a whole. It's well written, compelling, and paced pretty well outside of a few stints. Its autobiographical flashback format is a great way of telling a story over a long period of time, and the jumps in time also help with the believability of it all. I could make an entire video about Mafia's narrative, and I almost did, but a much more interesting topic is how the story is told. Recently I found a Reddit thread called Mafia's Major Flaws. The self-post was by someone who couldn't bring themselves to finish the game for a whole bunch of different reasons. They have 5 major complaints. The first is about the bad AI, which is kind of fair enough. Then the cover system, which there isn't one. Third is bad physics, fourth is the game-breaking bugs, and the final point is about how the cutscenes drive everything and the gameplay is just a side hassle. He elaborates on all of these points further down in the post. I'm not here to tear this post apart. Though I disagree with a lot of this, they can think whatever they like, and Mafia is definitely not a game for everyone. The reason I found this post so interesting is because of his final point. When he elaborates on how the gameplay is just a side hassle to the cutscenes, he makes a few different statements. He starts off by effectively saying he could have never played the game at all and just watched the cutscenes to fully take in the story. He makes the point that everything happens in the cutscenes, and even every meaningful death also happens in a cutscene, which is basically entirely true. Then one of his last lines says, gameplay does not reinforce the story. They simply coexist unjustly spiteful of each other. And on a surface level this makes sense. Mafia is an almost completely linear game set in an open world. Player agency isn't really a thing here, especially if you're looking for some sprawling multi-path story, because this is not that at all. Most people's experiences in playing through this will be pretty similar, and most important narrative beats do play out in cutscenes. Despite all this, everything surrounding the cutscenes is essential to why Mafia is so great, just for unusual reasons. So before I get into not talking about the narrative, I want to take a moment to talk about the narrative. Stay with me here. One of its priorities is making the protagonist, Tommy Angelo, relatable. The game starts before he joins the Mafia, and time is devoted to establishing his situation. This is most obvious in the second mission named Running Man. After refusing a job offer as a wheelman for the gang, the mission simply has you driving around as a regular 1930s cab driver. You have to take 5 different passengers around the city, and it's very deliberately mundane. Because of this, it's a somewhat infamous part of this game. It acts as a tutorial of sorts, teaching you as a player how to traverse this city and avoid the police. But more so, it's kind of an expository device. Running Man goes a long way towards making Angelo relatable. Where the writers could have simply had him accept the job, instead he opts to continue his work, and this brief section acts as a window into his life at the time. They could have also shown his taxi work in a cutscene, but instead you have to play it, and it's hard. If you drive in weird places or in out of the ordinary ways, passengers will comment on it, and you can annoy them enough to fail the mission and have to restart. The best way of completing this mission is by driving safely within the speed limit, especially because the police will come after you for simply breaching the limit or running a red light. The whole experience is tedious, but it's intentionally so because working on a job is not exciting, and that's exactly how both you and Angelo feel. One of the priorities of the entire first act of this story is to create a resonance between Tommy and you as a player. As well as helping you identify with the protagonist, the other effect this mission has is making this world believable. Of course, seeing this city and its inhabitants do their thing is a part of that, but there's a certain novelty to just being a small part of a larger world. You're just a cog in a machine, and this idea ends up being one of the themes of this game. The brief taxi section exemplifies some of the main design ideas behind Mafia, in that it prioritizes its storytelling and realism above anything else. At the core of Mafia's design is immersion. I know you're rolling your eyes at the I word, and it conjures up bad memories of back-of-the-box marketing buzzwords, but bear with me. This is a game which doesn't care if you're enjoying it or not. Instead, it tries to put you in the shoes of a mafioso rising through the ranks. Because of this, it's a polarizing game which has had a lot of criticisms leveled against it, many of which are valid in their own way. With all that in mind, let's finally get started and take a look at what works and what doesn't with the elements outside of the story and cutscenes, and why they're so important. As its subtitle implies, Mafia: The City of Lost Heaven takes place in the City of Lost Heaven. What a concept. It's a fictional American city which was designed as an embodiment and amalgamation of many typical US districts. It's all here, from Little Italy to Chinatown to downtown, and from the industrial works quarter to the slums of Hoboken. Lost Heaven establishes its identity through its distinctive districts and, of course, its time period. Each place has its name written in bold on the map and has its own great 30s music playing while you're there. Outside of the city is a surprisingly large countryside, which goes a long way towards selling Lost Heaven as a believable place. The in-game map cleverly doesn't include areas outside of the city, which makes it feel even larger because its size is unknown. Significant landmarks like the airport and the racetrack give the countryside purpose, and there's even locations which aren't ever visited in the campaign, like the dam and the lighthouse, which are so convincing even as just window dressing. The residents of Lost Heaven also do a good job on selling the place. Drivers obey traffic laws, indicate to turn corners, park their cars and go for walks, and pedestrians do the generic open world walking around thing, as well as entering buildings and using public transport. Fully functional trams and trains run throughout the city, and it all comes together to create the feeling that you're just another cog in a clockwork bustling metropolis. Of course, all these attributes, whilst done well here, have been exceeded in newer games, and though Lost Heaven is an effective city for Mafia, these characteristics are no longer impressive. The visual design, curated soundtrack, distinct districts, and of course the 1930s Great Depression time period build a realistic and likable atmosphere, but it's how the city changes over time that really sets it apart. Apart from the epilogue, the narrative takes place from 1930 to 1938, jumping forwards between years. Lost Heaven evolves over this time period. It allows for neat things like locations going from being under construction to finished, and newer, faster cars gradually entering the roadways. There's even an out-of-business car dealership in Chinatown, which goes back into business in 1938 when the Depression lifts. All this detail isn't really necessary for a game like this, but like I said earlier, Mafia is all about immersion, and here it's the minutia that sells it. Eurogamer's Mafia review from back in the day is infamous for how negative it is. The writer, John Bai, awarded the game with a whopping 4 out of 10. Regarding the driving, he wrote this: "Where GTA 3 is packed full of fast, exciting cars to steal and drive, Mafia is stuck with lumbering clunkers that hobble along at a snail's pace and accelerate from 0 to 60 in a time that is measured in minutes rather than seconds. Handling is awful, not because Illusion have done a bad job, but because the cars of that age weren't really that much fun to drive. And don't even think about driving up a steep hill. You could get out and walk faster. As such, forcing you to drive to and from Salieri's bar in almost every single mission is just sheer bloody mindedness, and the judgery of making your way back and forth across town within the 40 miles per hour speed limit without running any red lights or having any fun soon becomes incredibly repetitive. Dare to break the speed limit, assuming your car can go that fast, and the cops will be all over you like a bad suit. And whereas in GTA 3 this is half of the fun, in Mafia it's just something that gets in the way of you completing your mission." Though you might expect me to disagree with this guy, and aside from the annoying GTA 3 comparisons, he's actually kind of not wrong. Most of the cars in Mafia aren't exciting to drive. Their handling is awful, and some cars don't even make it up hills. But even he admits that they are realistic to the time period, and you can see where I'm going with this. The driving is meant to simulate that of old cars. The simulation-esque handling is backed up by the police system. Like John Bai wrote, if you run a red or breach the speed limit, you can get chased by cops. There aren't police driving around everywhere, but they do have enough of a presence to keep you in check. Thankfully, they appear on the minimap, so it's generally not too much of a hassle. If you do get caught, and they only want to ticket you, which is most of the time, it's generally best to just pull over, get the ticket, and move on, especially since there's no currency system. Unless you're like me and you've played this game too much and know it inside out, the best way to get around is generally just to drive safely. So you're driving realistic cars like a normal citizen and you're in a convincing city. The missions generally have you driving to and from your base. Driving in Lost Heaven intentionally feels like a commute. Sometimes if you lose your vehicle, using the public transport is a logical way of getting around, which feels even more like a real-life commute. In the world of frenzied video games, it's remarkable simply because of how normal it all feels. The best comparison that can be made regarding this feeling is to that of simulation games. You lose yourself to this game's driving in the same way you lose yourself to something like Euro Truck Simulator. It's a very similar feeling. Compare this to something like Grand Theft Auto 4, and that's 4, not 3. Mafia and GTA 4 both try to tell mature, realistic stories in open worlds, and where Mafia has you acting realistically when driving around, in GTA it's generally both best and most fun fun to drive around like an insane person, and the story in it feels so jarring in part because of that. There is one thing that is particularly awful about the driving though, and it's the unfair rubber banding that your pursuers do. It's super gamey and annoying, especially because cars are so susceptible to spinning out and crashing. It makes the chasers, and particularly the police, so much more frustrating. It's forgivable in the context of the whole game, but it still sucks. The gunplay in Mafia is hard. Frustratingly hard. A single shot from a shotgun at close range can take you out, and only a few well-placed shots from another weapon will do the same. Recoil is very high, so spray and pray doesn't really work, though crouching to fire somewhat alleviates the recoil. If you reload before finishing a clip, you lose the rest of that clip. AI are typically stupid, as were most in 2002, though they are accurate shots and can see further than 20 meters in front of them, so take a hint, Mafia 3. Checkpoints take the place of any quick save system, so you'll find yourself replaying sections pretty often, though I much prefer this to a quick save system in place of checkpoints. The result of all this is a gameplay loop which has you pivoting the camera around corners to check for enemies before tap firing whilst holding crouch as a pseudo aim down sights button. It's designed to resemble realistic firefights, and like the rest of this game, leans towards simulation when compared to your average game. Though cover plays an essential role, there is no cover system, but the controls are tight enough with the keyboard and mouse so that it's not missed. As far as firearms go, the usual suspects are here. 4 handguns, a Tommy gun, a pump-action shotgun, a sawn-off shotgun, and 2 bolt-action rifles. The inventory allows for you to hold 1 two-handed weapon in your jacket and 1 in your arms, as well as all 4 pistols in your jacket. This system works well on a realistic level, and on a gameplay level it occasionally has you deciding which weapons to use and drop. However, just bouncing between the Colt 1911 and the Tommy gun is generally the way to go, especially when the shotguns are gimped at range and the bolt actions only appear in 5 out of a total 21 missions. Despite Salieri's bar having a gunsmith, you don't pick the weapons he gives you, so you just have to roll with whatever you get and whatever you find. Speaking of underutilized weapons, you'd be forgiven for forgetting that Mafia has throwables. Grenades are usable in a total of 2 missions, and you really need to search them out to use them. Molotovs strangely have a tutorial-esque mission where you're given them to destroy some cars, yet never get to use them again. Well, that's not technically true, but really at the only other opportunity you get to use one. You have to kill a guy before he throws it and pick it up, and even then, that's only 1 single Molotov. It feels like the devs coded these 2 weapons into the game before immediately forgetting that they did just that. Annoyingly, the weapons would have been welcome amidst the firefights, providing more variety and decision-making into the mix. Melee weapons also play a role. The entire depth boils down to left-clicking to attack or holding left-click for a heavy attack. They're generally pretty clumsy, but they're only required for 1 mission. At its best, the combat consists of tense and visceral shootouts in visually pleasing, practically designed locations, and at its worst, it's a frustrating slog of trial and error and cheap deaths. Thankfully, it's more of the former, but it can be a bit of a nightmare when an enemy surprises you and spams you to death, effectively disabling you through aim punching. Every time you get hit in this game, there's a split second where you can't aim, move, or shoot, so you can just imagine what happens when an enemy has a Tommy gun right next to you. The unfair nature, whilst frustrating, does actually lend itself to Mafia's goal of realism. Generally, firefights are just you up against dozens of enemies, which in reality would be super unfair and difficult. It sort of helps the immersion from this perspective, but then the gaminess of reloading checkpoints somewhat negates it and dehumanizes the enemies. With all that said, if you have good aim and play carefully, 90% of the time it's a good time. It's not all that deep, but good animations, level variety, and effects bring it all together, and the combat is sparing enough within the whole campaign to stay exciting. The biggest problem with Mafia's combat is actually how it's implemented into the story, as Tommy ends up killing so many people that he can only really be described as psychotic. But this is a problem in basically every narrative-driven shooter, so I've sort of become desensitized to it. Overall, the combat is a mixed bag. Whilst it's usually entertaining to play, it both enhances and detracts from Mafia's overall goal of immersion. Though it's the weakest element of Mafia when it comes to this, the moment-to-moment still feels realistic, and it's still a solid set of mechanics. The final topic I want to look at is broad and not as obvious as everything covered so far, but it's still important for making Mafia what it is. Mafia is punctuated by its small details. I'm just going to bang out a list of some of the small cool things it does and then reflect on them a bit afterwards. Here goes. Mafia has support for force feedback racing wheels and manual transmission. You can choose to sit in the other seats of cars even though it serves no purpose. You can press the action button on almost every character and hear them say something to you, often with relevant characters sharing their thoughts and experiences at the time. Sometimes bystanders pick up weapons off people you kill and shoot at you with them. Downed enemies can be seen crawling along the ground. Cars have extensive damage models and your car can run out of fuel where it drains even faster if the tank is leaking. You can refill at a petrol station, though in my half dozen or so playthroughs I've only ever ran out once. All these little elements come together to create an experience which feels like it has a lot going on under the hood, especially alongside all the little Easter eggs scattered throughout the game. Obviously it doesn't, but there's a general feeling that Lost Heaven exists as a living world rather than a video game world, and it's the small details like these which tip it over into that territory. If one thing can be said about Mafia: The City of Lost Heaven, it's that it really stands out among its contemporaries. Being released less than a year after Grand Theft Auto 3, a grandfather of a game which still holds an influence in modern game design, Mafia's themes and design principles oppose those of GTA 3 in just about every way. Because of this, Mafia is still a refreshing experience to this day, particularly when open world game design is so damn samey now. It's worth noting that I first played this game in 2010, well after its release. It holds up just fine. Mechanically, Mafia shares its bloodline with simulators rather than anything else. If you've ever lost yourself in a war sim, you'll know that slogging through open fields or driving clunky realistic vehicles is all part of the illusion. Things like a limited inventory or dying after a single shot define what's enjoyable about these games. Its immersion comes through its mechanics, and Mafia tries to achieve the same thing in a similar way. Obviously, Mafia is more gamey than something like Arma, but it definitely shares its roots, especially as the developer Illusion Softworks did a lot of work on tactical shooters, as they also created the Hidden and Dangerous series and worked on Vietcong. Interestingly, these games also featured vehicles and driving, just like Mafia. Mafia's mechanics immerse you into its world and furthermore into its story. Outside of the campaign, Mafia features a free ride mode, and I find this mode to be hella boring. To me, the mechanics are designed to support the story, and that's what's so brilliant about them. If you extract the story, the whole package just falls apart, and this is evident in the free ride mode. If Mafia sounds boring and pretentious to you, then that's completely fine. Though I get a kick out of Mafia's design, the Eurogamer review and the Reddit post are both fair enough. Mafia is niche. It's definitely not for everyone because it's designed as a double-edged sword. You really need to be forgiving and patient at times to enjoy it, but at least for me, it's well worth the effort. I love it. Either that or I have serious Stockholm Syndrome. Who knows?